Ciao everyone, this is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel. I know that it isn't Tuesday, but seeing as this is the first official holiday that has come since starting this stone rolling, I couldn't pass up this opportunity without putting something onto YouTube. And what holiday is it? It's October 8th, which means that it's Columbus Day! Or Indigenous Peoples Day. Yes, since 1992, more and more people have argued that Columbus Day needs to be recontextualized into Indigenous Peoples Day, because Columbus was obviously a white, racist European who colonized the New World, and by colonizing it, simply enslaved, exploited, and massacred the Native American populations. Just last year, here on YouTube, Adam Canova from Adam Ruins Everything took a tour on the Magic School Bus and went through these 5 basic principles of Christopher Columbus. Columbus was an idiot who didn't listen to the experts of his time. Columbus was greedy who only wanted gold. Columbus was a murderer. Columbus was an idiot who believed that he discovered Asia. Columbus Day was created only in 1937, so getting rid of it wouldn't be a big deal. Now, some of these claims are false right off the bat. It's true that Columbus was not a formally educated man, and he did believe that the circumference of the globe was a lot smaller than the experts of his day said. Even though those same experts also said that it was impossible for there to be any continents other than Asia, Africa, and Europe, so there's that too. But while Columbus may not have been a formally educated man, he wasn't exactly a dummy. In the decade before his first voyage, he put himself on a pretty rigorous, self-educating regimen, reading the works of Marco Polo, Pierre Dalet, Pliny the Elder, and other works of travel and natural science to get ready for his first voyage. It's also not true that Columbus went to his grave believing that he had discovered Asia. On his 4th voyage in 1495, when he landed off the coast of Venezuela, Columbus finally realized that what he had done was not discover a new way to the east, but had discovered an entirely new continent. Now, it is true that Columbus was very friendly towards some of the Native Americans. When he landed on Hispaniola, he became very friendly with the Arawak chief, Gukanagawi, and even adopted Gukanagawi's son. But after Columbus left his colony on Hispaniola and sailed back to Spain to report to the king and queen, the Spaniards did start to attack and enslave the Arawaks, because the Spaniards believed that the gold the Arawaks were giving them was too little, too late. The Arawaks read the writing on the wall, saw that this was going to be their future, and began sabotaging the Spaniards, attacking back, digging up their crops in the hopes that the Spaniards would starve to death, and fled into the hills of Hispaniola. The Spaniards responded by hunting them down with war dogs, like actual war dogs. Huge dogs bred to fight in war. When Columbus came back from Spain, he found everything in chaos. He tried to reestablish order by putting his brother Bartholomew in charge of the colony while he continued to explore the Caribbean. But when he returned from his voyages to Hispaniola, he found the whole thing in complete and utter chaos, and at that point, sick and at the end of his tether, Columbus did okay the attacking of the Indians and their enslavement. It also should be noted at this point, for the sake of historical accuracy, because if I don't do it, people in the comment section will, that even when Columbus first discovered the Arawaks on Hispaniola, he wrote back to the king and queen that their docile manners and their healthy physiques would make them excellent slaves. So did the Spaniards commit atrocities against the Indians? Yes. Did Columbus give his okay to some of these atrocities? Yes. Does that mean we need to recontextualize Columbus Day into Indigenous Peoples Day? No. Transforming Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day sounds like a great idea from where we're sitting, because we have an image of the Indians in our head that sees them as peace-loving people who are living by the mantra of, "I am one with nature and nature is with me," until the Europeans came and mucked up the whole thing. But this image is just as wrong as the image of Columbus that ideologues have been ranting against since 1992. The truth is that the Indians were just as nasty, brutal, and vicious as the Europeans. The Carib Indians, who were another tribe in the Caribbean, were cannibalistic. The Aztec Indians over in Mexico perfected human sacrifice to a science. And most of the tribes in North America saw themselves as the principal people, which meant that if you weren't part of the tribe, you were lower on the totem pole, which meant that you were right for attacking, slaughtering, raping, and enslavement. But even if the Indians were the Rousseauian innocents that we would like to think that they were, who were abused and brutalized by the evil, greedy Europeans, so what? Seriously, so what? The world of the 16th century was a cruel and brutal place, and every nation and every culture knew that if they wanted to survive, they were going to have to be just as brutal and just as vicious as everyone else. That was the environment, that was the culture, that was the milieu that everybody back then was born into and in which they breathed. Take the Spaniards. In 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the Spaniards had just finished a 700-year war against the Muslims who had invaded Spain in the 8th century. Now, 700 years of almost constant warfare had made the Spanish some of the best soldiers of Europe at that time. But it had also made them extremely brutal to their enemies. And it wasn't just the Spaniards. The English, for instance, created pressing and hanging, drawing, and quartering as crimes for capital punishments, of which there were a ton. The French had a little something called the St. Bartholomew Days Massacre, and in the 16th and 17th centuries, all of Europe was going to be racked by the wars of religion, which would eventually kill about 10 million people, and which brought about the worst in everybody, as everybody tried to kill everybody else because everybody else was a heretic. And it wasn't just the Europeans. The Muslims were just as brutal. In his book, The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise, Professor Dario Fernandez Morera writes that the Muslims who invaded Spain in the 8th century were barbarians who enslaved and slaughtered their way across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Spain, and who kept Spain under a system of Sharia law that was not tolerant or secular. They kept Jews and Christians as second-class citizens, committed pogroms against the Jews, which were just as bad, if not worse, than the pogroms that were committed in Christian Europe, and treated women so badly and so inferiorly that women in Christian Spain were actually better off than in Muslim Spain, because in Christian Spain, women had more freedom in the day-to-day outdoor activities and had better access to political power. Now, I'm not saying that these things, enslaving people, slaughtering them, are right. I'm not saying that those things were right back then in the past and somehow became not right for us today. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that this is how the world worked back in the 16th century. And so it's completely natural that Columbus and the Spaniards and basically all the Europeans who came after them would act in this way. That, again, doesn't make enslavement and massacring right, but it should give us a little bit of perspective. Instead of broadly condemning the past and everyone in it for the sins they committed, sins which we don't have any temptation to commit today, I should add, maybe we should come to the past with a little bit of humility and understanding, a little bit of, dare I say the word, tolerance for the people who were living life the only way that they knew how. Aren't our minds big enough to be able to hold two separate and non-contradictory thoughts at the same time? That enslaving and massacring people is wrong? And two, that this was the accepted way of the world back then, and that the people who committed these terrible deeds, more likely than not, didn't know that they were wrong. The past is a foreign country. We're never going to be able to understand it completely. But if we want the future to treat us fairly, to praise us for our accomplishments and condemn us for our mistakes, then maybe we should treat the past in the same way. And the past did achieve great accomplishments, one of them being the discovery of the New World, which is one of the greatest events and discoveries in all of history. That's the reason why we celebrate Columbus and have Columbus Day. Because if we're really honest with ourselves, if we look at the past objectively, we're going to understand that our condemnation shouldn't be directed towards Columbus or to the Spaniards or to the Europeans or to the past in general, but to the thin line that divides good and evil in every human heart, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. That line has been there since the beginning, and it's probably not going to go anywhere as long as there are people here. But what say you? Should we continue celebrating Columbus Day because of the discovery of the New World itself? Or does justice demand that we reconfigure it to celebrate the Native Americans? As always, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Well, gang, that about wraps up this special edition on the Stone. I will see you all tomorrow for our weekly get-together, and happy Columbus Day. Ciao.